Good morning, beautiful people. Good afternoon and good evening. It doesn't matter what time it is, just know today is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. Why? Because God is good and He's good all the time. Done. Y'all, I know I'm inconsistent with posting videos, but baby, let me tell you something. This ain't no full-time job. This is more like something that I enjoy doing. It's like a little hobby. It's something that keeps me occupied, you know what I'm saying? When I got a little free time, because like the Bible says, an idle mind is the playground for the devil. It's something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but I got to stay busy. So forgive me for the inconsistency. I will get better over time. Just be patient with me. And remember that Tierra Grayson is still human, just like you, baby. I procrastinate. Sometimes life's take a toll on me, be whooping the dog mess out of me. But the race is not given to the swift or the strong, but to the one who endures to the end. Let me say it again, just in case you ain't hear me from all the mumbling. The race is not given to the swift nor strong, but to the one who endures to the end. It's the one with the better stamina, okay? We motherfreaking enduring. As you see, we back on it. Finishing the book, Blood at the Root, A Racial Cleansing in America by Patrick Phillips. We are motherfreaking reading today, chapter 5. We finished off chapter 4. Make sure you take a look at the motherfreaking description, okay? Because within the description, I include ample links that shows or that you can watch me reading the earlier chapters 4, 3, 2, and 1, but also, some informatory things that I posted in there, some informational links that I had put in there just to keep you, occupied and educated, right? And so without further ado, we're going to get into this book, baby. Do y'all like me holding a book like this? I mean, I know it might look weird, but it's a little easier for me to read, you know what I'm saying? And then I see that you could still see it, in the screen without me holding it down like this. And it's like, what is she doing? Why is she looking down reading? So if I hold it up like that, you can see what I'm doing. And I can still, see the words, right? Because I am a glasses wearer. However, it's more for an astigmatism, but it depends on how the light hit the eyeballs, okay? So without further ado, let's get into it because I done took too long. Chapter 5, A Straw in the Whirlwind. That's what it's titled. Now, that ain't the first word. The first word is while. The public whipping of Grant Smith. So for those who don't remember, Grant Smith is the pastor, right? From the previous chapter. So while the public whipping of Grant Smith had put the entire black community on edge, the sight of Edward's corpse hanging over the public square sent whole wagon trains of refugees out onto the roads of the county. They fled south toward Atlanta, east towards Gainesville, and west toward Canton. African Americans in Forsyth knew that nothing they said or did was likely to convince Bill Reed, who is the sheriff at this time, to pursue those who had murdered Rob Edwards, which in this sense is an innocent bystander who just so happened to be a black man who was viewed as a foreigner. Because you know how these psychos love to do, right? And I say psychos because people love to look for the outsider, right? The thing that sticks out. I mean, we see it even when it comes to crime, where people perceive that crime is more likely to take place amongst people, that are strangers, don't know each other, and overlooked a great majority of tests out there, test results, when it comes to stuff like this, that you are more likely to be harmed by someone you know. But they came for Rob Edwards because he's a black dude. They were aware he was not from, Forsyth County. So they just assumed, since this little white girl, ended up basically abused and later on died, it had to be the strange black guy that nobody knows, even though we're living in a time of segregation. But I digress. Actually, a time of publicly known segregation, because we still live in segregation, but it's more of apartheid now. It's legal segregation. So, and if anyone still held out hope that in the wake of the killing, whites might leave their black neighbors in peace, they learned otherwise the next morning when tensions rose over the burning of a building near Cumming. When they heard that the storehouse of a white man named Will Boose had mysteriously caught fire in the night, whites concluded that it was the work of black arsonists retaliating for the lynching. It's interesting how these people be wreaking havoc on people. And then when something happens to them that may be by chance, or you know what I'm saying? Because the Bible says you reap what you sow, right? The Bible also tells us that everything that we do, good or bad, we are held accountable for our deeds, right? And so these can be just literally random things that are taking place, you know what I'm saying? And they're just like, oh, it's the Negroes. It's the Negroes. They're retaliating for the harm that we inflicted upon them unwarranted. It's crazy. It's crazy. So the Georgian reported that the clouds of race war, which have hung over Forsyth, threatened to break into a storm of bloodshed today. The fire was taken as proof that just like in Plainsville, Cumming was now on the brink of a black resurrection. Rumors that the Negroes are arising and arming themselves had led almost to a panic among the women of the little town, one observer wrote, adding that even the conservative men fear that the lynching of yesterday and the burning of a store today was merely the first movements in a race war, which may have swept the country, which may have swept the county and bring death to many. Citizens are arming for trouble. Obviously, they're talking about the white women of the little town, you know, because the black women were just as terrified as the motherfucking black males, you know, and children. So, and you have to remember in these locales, right, these areas were divided, but they were homogeneously white in one section and homogeneously black in another, and so on and so forth. But despite all the rumors, most black residents were too busy trying to protect their families to think about retaliations. Yeah, sounds about right. What they still do to this day. Like African Americans all over the Jim Crow South, they understood that even the mildest forms of resistance or the faintest hint of protest can trigger a new wave of white violence. This is why when people sit here and say, well, why black people don't defend each other? Why black people don't stand up for one another? We have seen time and time again through historical accounts that when black individuals not even stand up for one another, but stand up for themselves, they are made the example to the rest of them of what happens when you try to advocate for yourself. Now, you include the advocating or the advocation of others. Now they're also even more, they're even more in fear of trying to defend or help anyone because they're like, baby, I can't even defend me. And you want me to help you? This is why a lot of black individuals have this, you know, out of sight, out of mind. I'm gonna lay low, mind my own business type ordeal because we have been punished for even sticking up for our own, you know, spouses, children's, brothers, you know, daddies, parents, right? I mean, we've even spoke of a lady in here, Mary Turner, in the previous chapters, who was a pregnant woman whose husband was abused, right? He was murdered. He was lynched. And then she went around making it known, trying to gain justice for the murder of her husband. And you know what happened to Mary Turner? Mary Turner was turned around and murdered herself. And in fact, she was so brutally murdered that these weirdos carved out her unborn baby. She was about 8 months pregnant. These jokers carved out her unborn baby and stomped the baby. Mary Turner, a black woman who advocated the justice that she wanted for her husband's murder. So again, historically, black people have been taught time and time again, you can't even advocate for yourself, let alone trying to advocate for somebody else. Many would have heard about the black woman in Oklahoma, who in 1911 had been killed for no crime other than defending her 15-year-old son against a lynch mob. Defending her son. Newspapers reported that when Laura Nelson confronted the white man who had accused her boy of stealing, Nelson was dragged from her house and repeatedly raped before she and the son she tried to protect were hung side by side from a bridge over the Canadian River. Wow. And this is in Okima, Oklahoma. If anyone in Forsyth's black community thought of publicly naming the leaders of the mob that had killed Edwards, they would have understood the terrible risk. So these people didn't even want to make it known on who the murderers were to rob Edwards, even though they were aware, because they did not want to risk increasing white violence just for speaking out against some heinous, egregious acts that has been brought against their community. It's insane. Jesus have mercy. Only a few years later, in 1918, a pregnant woman named Mary Turner would be killed in Lowndes County, Georgia, for having openly grieved for her husband, Hayes. When she threatened to swear out warrants against the man who had abducted and lynched him, the response was swift and savage, even by the standards of Jim Crow, Georgia. According to historian Philip Dre, before a crowd that included women and children, Mary was stripped, hung upside down by the ankles, soaked with gasoline, and roasted to death. In the midst of this torment, a white man opened her swollen belly with a hunting knife, and her infant fell to the ground, gave out a cry, and was stomped to death. Now, mind you, these are the same, conservative parties, because this is 1911. These are the same conservative Republican parties that exist today that wants to tell us that they're pro-life. Interesting. Like Mary Turner, Jane Daniel must have carried an almost unbearable burden of grief, rage, and fear when she learned hardly a day after her cousin, Ernest, had been taken prisoner, that her husband, Rob, had been hanged on the Cumming Square, his body gawked at by whites and torn apart by hundreds of bullets. But if Jane was tempted to go to county officials seeking justice or to raise her voice in lament, she knew that to do so could have deadly consequences. So just her going to her leaders, which would be today's politicians, and saying, hey, my husband was brutally murdered. And these are the individuals who done it. She was in fear of being murdered herself because she viewed the government through cynicism. And this legal cynicism exists amongst the black community. It runs rawshot, baby. But it's the cynicism that exists that the system is incapable of doing their job effectively, which includes protecting and serving me, an individual that is hated by bigots. It had happened many times and would happen again in Georgia. After lynching a black victim, mobs often turned their attentions to surviving family members for crying out in grief or calling for arrests, or for simply knowing who it was who had pulled a trigger or lobbed a rope over a tree limb. But then people wonder why the no snitching concept is so heavy in the black community. Baby, it's ingrained in us historically. There ain't no justice for us, especially when there's demise at the hands of a white person. Like thousands of other widows of lynched black men, Jane Daniel knew that her only chance at safety was silence. Not even that was enough in the end, for on Wednesday, September 11th, newspapers reported that Jane Daniel, her brother Oscar, and their neighbor Ed Collins had been arrested in connection with the Crow assault. According to the Constitution, another lynching at Cumming was narrowly averted when a mob formed to take these Negroes and swing them up to the same telephone pole on which their partner in crime swung yesterday. This time, though, Mayor Charlie Harris was ready, and before the mob could organize a second siege of the county jail, he had Reed and his deputies slip the prisoners out of the jail and make a run in automobiles for Atlanta. This is cops booking it with alleged black defendants who didn't have squat to do with anything. They were just thrown in it because, I mean, that was the thing that happened back then. Something happened detrimental to white people. They blamed the person they viewed lesser of them. It's kind of like what we do now, blaming our problems on the lesser of us, or the ones that we perceive lesser of us, like the immigrants. Oh, all the immigrants are taking our jobs. The immigrants are committing all this crime in America, even though data says that majority of crime is committed by native-born citizens. And immigrants and their descendants are less likely to engage in crime compared to native-born citizens. But we're going to sit here and blame the people that ain't got squat to do with nothing. Ain't no new phenomenon. Like the Bible says, ain't nothing new under the sun. You got cops taking off. You got mother freaking government employees taking off, booking it in fear of white people. I see why y'all was so quick to call, that little protest of them white people just showing up at the Capitol, the riot on the Capitol, or mother freaking the war on the Capitol. I don't know what it is with our politicians, but baby, y'all are scared of these poor white people. And the crazy part about it is that y'all made them. You contributed to a lot of their psychosis, but you scared them. I digress. Let's continue. Having safely delivered Jane, Oscar, and Ed Collins to the Fulton Tower and added them to a group of prisoners that now included 11 black residents of Forsyth. 11. All 11 of these people are involved in this one girl. I bet money that it was this May Crow girl uncle or some kin. Somebody should know. Maybe a boyfriend that she was trying to sneak or something. I'm telling you, the wild stuff be happening. Oh, Jesus Christ, have mercy. Having safely delivered Jane, Oscar, and Ed Collins to the Fulton Tower and added them to a group of prisoners that now included 11 black residents of Forsyth, Bill Reed took time Wednesday morning to speak with Atlanta reporters. Under the headlines, Graphic Story of Terror Reign, the Georgian gave Reed center stage, introducing him to readers as the picturesque sheriff of Forsyth County, who came to Atlanta with a carload of black prisoners and tales of a mob run wild in the Georgia foothills. Sound like some hillbillies, hills have eyes type jump, right? Squinting down at a crowd of reporters with their pencils poised, Reed quickly warmed to his role as the mustachioed six-shooter carrying country lawman fighting a race war on the North Georgia frontier. Oh my goodness, the titles that they be giving these weirdos that be doing absolutely nothing but running and hiding with their tails between their legs. The people of Cumming have been sleeping with one eye open. Reed began. I don't know why. The scary black people, the bookie people, the bookie people? Jesus. I don't like reading this type of material because it invokes emotions, right? It provokes emotions that I ain't really trying to get provoked. On top of the fact that I know what it is, what it's hitting for, right? Hate exists. You can't take out hate. Hate exists. But we cannot sit here and act like this behavior didn't derive from years and years and years and years. And at this point, it was about 200 years of divide and conquer tactics that has been repeatedly pushed amongst, racial minorities and even white people, where white people, poor whites, were made to think that they were different or had something up on the racial minorities. And it's mind-blowing because literally the term white trash stemmed from black people saying, hey, bro, I know I'm in this predicament, at the bottom of the totem pole because I'm black. I'm black. What the freak is your excuse though, bro? You're white. You're white. How are you living what looks to be worse than me? And you're white. So the term literally stemmed from the fact that you had white people where whiteness was perceived as power, but then you come in contact with these white people that ain't got none because they poor. And it's like, what's wrong with you? I thought white is right. You white. But baby, you living just as bad as I am, if not worse. It's crazy. It's crazy. That's all I'm saying. The fall of the night has brought fear and dread to the town and surrounding county, for there is no telling what might happen. It's the dread of treachery, the torch, and the knife stab in the back. We could easily handle any emergency in the daytime. The white people are armed and would promptly crush any uprising on the part of the blacks. Excitement has been high and an uneasy feeling pervades the community. Given that raids on black churches and homes were already driving many families across the county line, Reed's account of the situation in Forsyth now seems not just distorted, but downright delusional. Okay. He describes a white population in terror of an impending uprising on the part of blacks, and fearful that they might wake to the knife stab in the back. It's crazy when you out here just wreaking havoc on people. How it out of nowhere just makes you paranoid. Baby, them black folks ain't even thinking about you, except for the fact that it's like, yo, I just want to live tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? Like, they going around killing us. And I just want to make it to tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? I want me and my children to make it to tomorrow. That's probably the bare minimum thought that they putting towards these people. But these jokers is living in fear, literally paranoid, over some stuff that they brought on to themselves. It's crazy. And whole time, the same thing that they was fearing wasn't even brewing. It's crazy. Delusion, psychosis, I mean, you call it what you want. It's crazy. When in truth, the only real uprising was being carried out by white vigilantes and arsonists. I'm going to say that again. Okay? He describes a white population in terror of an impending uprising on the part of the blacks, and fearful that they might wake to the knife stab in the back. When in truth, the only real uprising was being carried out by white vigilantes and arsonists. Yet even as black families stood guard over their homes, listening for the sound of approaching hoofbeats or the ominous snap of a twig, whites were the ones in a state of constant paranoia. Now, would you look at that? Would you look at that? Unable to shake their deepest, oldest fear that the sins of their forefathers would finally be avenged by the children and grandchildren of slaves. Baby, this is the same notion, the concept that is motherfucking hell today. I mean, people have been pushing this race war bullcrap forever. But in recent, it's been very prevalent and pervasive since Trump came into the picture. There's a race war between blacks and whites that's coming. Then now you got Trump that wins the motherfucking presidency. Guess who? White people, and I won't say it as in the general sense, but I'm going to say it, the white people that has the power of media to push this, you know, these illusions and try to push them as truth. But they motherfucking now want black people to believe, hey, it's you black people versus the white people and the white adjacents. Because look at them. Everybody voted for Trump except for y'all. Majority of black people, they say majority of black people, although it technically would be majority of black voters voted for Harris, okay? Kamala Harris. But they sit here and tell you majority of black people voted for Kamala Harris. Look at all these other people. All of them is the reason why you about to go back into slavery. It's because of the white people and the white adjacents, which they include the Native Americans, the Latinos, and Asians. Baby, if we not motherfucking pushing the same race bait, I mean, it's the same garbage. And now you got people fighting or feuding, quarreling over something that don't even exist. And I think it's crazy because in one breath, they sit here and say, majority of black people voted Democrat. And in the same breath, they sit here blaming black men for voting for Trump. How can majority black men vote for Kamala and Trump all in the same election? Divisive rhetoric. I mean, nothing has changed. And yet these people think, hey, the children of the grandchildren and so on is about to come for us because of all the wild stuff that our forefathers done and the stuff that we continue to do. Baby, us Negroes just want to live. That's really that's really what it boils down to. We don't give a damn about you, okay? Okay? Not in the sense that you think. We don't give a damn about you. When reporters turned to the subject of Rob Edwards' lynching, Reed hit his stride as a star in a tabloid drama. On the day of the lynching, the sheriff had gone to great lengths to extricate himself from the thorny problem of opposing a mob that included many of his own relations. It definitely said relatives, but I want to come back to that because it's crazy. This guy's a police officer. His job is to protect and serve the people, which includes these black individuals as well. But it says on the day of the lynching, the sheriff had gone to great lengths to extricate himself from the thorny problem, to remove himself from the problem of opposing a mob that included many of his own relatives, friends, and political supporters. You got to remember, this joker was the sheriff of Forsyth County. But once he got to Atlanta, he didn't miss an opportunity to recast himself as the hero who tried in vain to save Rob Edwards. Now, baby, if you go back, chapters 1 through 4, you'll see it ain't what motherfucking Bill Reed is over here saying. Just out here lying. Now, this is Bill Reed. I was at my home when the mob began to form, Reed said, and feeling against the Negro burst forth in all its fury. Though newspaper reports all agreed that it was Loomis who was left to lock the doors of the jail, which was another sheriff who was under Bill Reed, who was left to lock the doors of the jail and put the heavy bars in place. Reed now claimed it was he who had bravely tried to thwart the lynchers. Oh my goodness. This ain't nothing new. Politicians taking credit for stuff that they ain't had squat to do just because they want some recognition so they can elevate in their political positions. I mean, ain't nothing new. I realized it was too late to attempt to get Edwards out of the jail and spirit him away. There was but one thing to do. I hid the jail keys. I did this as I knew that even though I should be overpowered, the mob would still be handicapped. Oh my goodness. And it wasn't even him. It was Loomis, his partner, his subordinate. At a single stroke, Reed's revision of the story solved two problems. He erased the genuine bravery with which Deputy Loomis had stood his ground and claimed that it was actually he, Forsyth's crafty old sheriff, who had slowed the rioters. Such quick thinking had not ultimately saved Rob Edwards, Reed implied, but that was not because he hadn't done his darnness. A few minutes after he hid the keys to the jail, he told reporters, a crowd of fully 100 men called at my home and demanded the keys. I told them they could not get the keys and begged them not to attempt violence. Then, at a signal, the crowd went back to the jail. There was no jailer on duty there, as I have to look after the jail and care of the prisoners myself. Oh, Bill. And you are somebody's, ancestor. Just embarrassing. By whitewashing Loomis out of the scene and skipping over the fact that he himself had abandoned his post, Bill Reed abandoned his post where Loomis, the deputy under him, under his command, actually stood his ground trying to defend, the jail. Reed implied that he was the last line of defense. The mob poured wildly into the jail, smashing locks as it came to them. He said, adding just enough detail to help readers forget that he had not, in fact, been present at the time. Bill Reed was not present at the time. Break it down, Rob Edwards' cell door. The infuriated men yanked the cringing Negro into the corridor. Someone struck him on the head with a sledgehammer, fracturing his skull. Then someone else shot him. As a final flourish, Reed said that several friends kept me in my home while the jail was under attack. Then he reminded readers that even had he been there, the big sheriff would have been unable to save Edwards. Of course, it would have been all the same if I had been there. Oh my goodness. Even though I do carry about a lot of flesh and muscle, I would have been like a straw in the whirlwind against that crowd. Yeah, because it was full of your kinfolk, your friends, your church members and politicians who provide you support as, the county sheriff. Make sense? The sheriff had hardly finished his tale when a reporter for the Georgian, recognizing a scoop when he heard one, ran off to file his story. Reed had managed in one rambling, Falstaffian interview to claim that he'd ingenuously hidden the jail keys, that he had been held prisoner by the mob, and that he would have been unable, despite his great strength and muscular physique, to have stopped the lynchers, even if, by some superhuman effort, he had managed to escape his captors. With that, the future Ku Klux Klansman and self-proclaimed straw in the whirlwind of the lynching climbed into a car and drove off. He was anxious, he said out of the window, to be on the scene when darkness came. This is... Just want to circle some words. Give me something to look for later. See what that means. The story of the race riot in Forsyth disappeared from Georgia's newspaper almost as quickly as it had appeared. In a single week, Cumming had witnessed the near lynching of Grant Smith, the arrival of the Marietta Rifles to quell an imagined race war, the discovery of May Crow's bloody body, the killing of Rob Edwards, and the imprisonment of nearly a dozen young black suspects who were now awaiting trial in the Fulton Tower. Excuse me, I'm just checking the time. As Reed drove back north on the afternoon of September 12th, editors in Atlanta were proofing the last of the stories they would run about Forsyth for almost a month. Quiet reigns in Cumming, they assured readers. No disorder of any kind. When Reed went to work the next morning, he found the town square humming with activity for the first time in days. Wealthy wives of the county were finally willing to brave the streets, and visions of black revolutions were fading into the background as Cumming returned for the most part to business as usual. Everyone knew that the prisoners would be brought back from Atlanta to stand trial, and that their return would whip the violent element of the county into another fury, particularly if witnesses were called, as they surely would be, to testify about May Crow's injuries. But all of that lay in the future, and in an effort to diffuse the situation, Judge Newt Morris announced that both the Grice and Crow cases would be postponed until the next regular session of the Blue Ridge Circuit Court, scheduled for late October. This left white residents in a state of uncertainty, particularly since Bud and A.Z. Crow's daughter was still unconscious out in Oscarville in critical condition from her head wounds. Mayor Harris and Deputy Loomis wouldn't have been the only Cumming residents who looked warily toward the future, wondering just what sort of mayhem's news of her death might unleash. But for hundreds of black people in the county, the worst kind of trouble had already begun. Though it would take weeks before reports reached Atlanta in the days after the attack on Crow, a nighttime ritual began to unfold. As each evening at dusk, groups of white men gathered at the crossroads of the county. They came with satchels of brass bullets, shotgun shells, and stoppered glass bottles of kerosene and sticks of Red Cross dynamite poked out through the tops of their saddlebags. When darkness fell, the night rider set out with one goal: to stoke the terror created by the lynching of Edwards and use it to drive black people out of Forsyth County for good. In 1907, W.E.B. Du Bois had put into words what every colored person in Georgia knew from experience, which was that the police system of the South was primarily designed to control slaves, and tacitly assumed that every white man was ipso facto a member of that police. I'm going to say that again, because this is still standing true in 2024. They said in 1907, W.E.B. Du Bois had put into words what every colored person in Georgia knew from experience, which was that the police system of the South was primarily designed to control slaves and tacitly assumed that every white man was ipso facto a member of that police. That's how it feels here. And I live in Rochester, New York, okay? Ain't no slaves here, just black people. A couple of, Latinos, Asians, maybe say some Native Americans here and now. In the first decade of the 20th century, the days when all white men had been legally empowered to pursue and arrest fugitive slaves were only 15 years in the past, and the fathers and the grandfathers of many locals would have been part of such posses in the days of slavery. Now, go back to the earlier chapters, but you will see that when all this stuff started to arise in regards to Rob Edwards, Bill Reed, who is the sheriff, began to deputize men to be sheriffs. Deputize basically means to give a position of power as a sheriff temporarily to citizens, regular citizens. These are people that did not take any test. They didn't go through any of the prerequisites to become, a police officer or sheriff. They were just deputized in a state of emergency, right? And historically, the only males to be deputized into the sheriff's department were white men. And if you look on the history of policing, they don't really have a great history. You know what I'm saying? The police force was actually created as night watch, where it was literally people who were criminals, people who were in trouble for committing crime. They were tasked to hold the position of night watch, which is what we call modern day police officers now. So they were the ones that were supposed to, ring the bell if you've seen a fire. They were supposed to, keep problems at a bay, minimize, all the wild stuff going on, the loitering, the prostitution. But they found that the police officers were engaging in these egregious, immoral, illegal acts themselves. And so that's when a shift became, it came around. And that's when the police department became more centralized. And that's when, it became the Shire Reeves, you know what I'm saying? It was one individual who oversaw several other individuals, and it was more like communal policing. And then it became more and more centralized into what we see policing is now today. So it doesn't shock me that our police officers are criminals and are engaged in criminal activities when their onset were staffed by criminals as a punishment. Your punishment for committing the crime you did was to police your community. Interesting. But yeah, only white men were deputized. No one else. All right, let's continue. In 1907, I got to say it one more time. So, it must have seemed natural to many whites when each night around sundown, a knock came at the door and the adult men of the family were summoned to join a group heading out toward the clusters of black cabins scattered around Forsyth along the Chattahoochee out in Oscarville in the shadow of Sawney Mountain north of Cumming and south towards Shakarag and Big Creek. It would take months, and in a handful of cases, years, before the in-town blacks of Cummings were finally forced out, since many lived under the protection of rich white men. Makes sense. Post-slavery entered sharecropping. People thought sharecropping ended, but my dad was born in 1962, and my dad was a sharecropper in his adolescence, It's interesting. It would take months, and in a handful of cases, years, before the in-town blacks of Cummings were finally forced out, since many lived under the protection of rich white men in whose kitchens and dining rooms they served. Instead, it was to the homes of cotton pickers, sharecroppers, and small landowners that the night riders went first. And it was these most vulnerable families who fled in the first waves of the Exodus. Written traces of the raids are few and far between and consist mostly of vague reports of lawlessness after dark. Sundown town. Since journalists only started writing about the expulsions once the wagon trains of refugees grew too large and too numerous to ignore, it is hard to say precisely what took place on those first nights of the terror. Now, I got to pause right here because I think it's interesting that they referred to black folk who natively resided in Forsyth, those that fled Forsyth post, the white people wreaking havoc and basically kicking them out, as it said here, exposed them. So aside from this, I think it's interesting that these black people, many of whom were born here in the United States, and their families been here throughout generations due to slavery, and even those that are indigenous here, was here before slavery, right? But these very people, now that they're leaving Forsyth County and seeking a better life somewhere else within the United States, somewhere that's a lot more safe, somewhere that they could survive, they're considered refugees. And here in 2024, in the United States of America, we use migrants and immigrants interchangeably. We talk about how their residence is illegal. And then we just continue this rhetoric. And then it's not uncommon to hear refugees get thrown in there too, about how, in the state of New York, they got these refugees here and they're giving them better treatment than us and blah, 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 blah. But it's crazy because these people, these black people who left Forsyth County and went elsewhere because of the harm, the violence that has been inflicted upon them, while seeking a better life, they're referred to as refugees. Now, going back to what I said, in 2024, we sit here and talk about immigrants and migrants as if they just, oh my goodness, they're illegal. They don't belong. And it blows my mind because people, like I said, use migrants and immigrants interchangeably. Immigrants and migrants are the same thing, except for one major difference. Immigrants applies to people who come from an outside country to a whole nother country in search of a better life, want things changed and different from where, what they had and where they come from. Migrants, same exact sentiment, except the only difference is a migrant. These people will be considered migrants. They currently resided in Forsyth. They was chased out by some mother freaking murderous, hateful white racist folk, right? And they went to a whole nother state for a whole different change of life. Them people in this book will be considered migrants because they're migrating from one location to another, seeking a better life. I think it's crazy how semantics change depending on who's the target. It's crazy. I keep telling people the same ostracizing rhetoric you use for another group could be the same support to oppress your raggedy tail. You think you doing something by hurting immigrants, migrants, inmates, children, old people, a whole time. The same thing you permit with these people, these gay people, these black people, these white people, this person, this poor person, the same mother freaking support you gave them to treat this individual like garbage is the same support they're going to utilize when they come for you. They come for you. Then you're going to look stupid because they're going to be like, well, you was all for the expulsion of them. You was all for the incarceration of them. You was all for the deportation of them. You was all for the oppression of them. But not you, hypocrite. Y'all in the same boat. Y'all the same type of people. Your people. That's all they care about. Let's keep going. Excuse me. Written traces of the raids are few and far between and consist mostly of vague reports of lawlessness after dark. since journalists only started writing about the expulsions once the wagon trains of refugees grew too large and too numerous to ignore. It is hard to say precisely what took place on those first nights of the terror. Some of the attacks later made headlines in Atlanta. Negroes flee from Forsyth. Enraged white people are driving blacks from county. And it's likely that similar raids have been happening since the discovery of Maycrow's body in early September. The night riders fired shots into front doors, threw rocks through windows, and hollered warnings that it was time for black families to get. But of all their methods, torches and torches and kerosene worked best, since a fire created a blazing sign for all to see and left the victims no place to ever come back to. In mid-October, the Augusta Chronicle reported that a score or more of homes had been burned during the past few weeks in 5 Negro churches. The arsonists must have been terrifying wherever they struck. But for Forsyth's poor black farmers, the burning of churches was a true catastrophe, striking not just at the community's spiritual home, but at what Du Bois called the social center of Negro life. In 1903, sitting in his Atlanta University office just 40 miles south, he had described Georgia's rural black congregations as the most characteristic expression of African character in the entire community. Take a typical church, Du Bois wrote. It is finished in Georgia pine with a carpet, a small organ, and benches. This building is the central clubhouse of community of Negroes. Various organizations meet here: the church proper, the Sunday school, 2 or 3 insurance societies, women's societies, secret societies, and mass meetings of various kinds. Entertainment, suppers, and lectures are held. Considerable sums of money are collected and expended here. Employment is found for the idle. Strangers are introduced. News is disseminated and charity distributed. At the same time, this social, intellectual, and economic center is a religious center of great power. Depravity, sin, redemption, heaven, hell, and damnation are preached twice a Sunday after the crops are laid by. The erasure of such places from the map of Forsyth was complete. Today, all that's left are a few scant details about the dates on which churches were founded, lot numbers for the land on which they stood, and the names of a handful of ministers and worshipers who once gathered there. Back Band Church, out near Oscarville, was where Buck and Katie Daniels sat on Sunday mornings, surrounded by their sons Cicero and Harley, their daughter Jane, and their youngest boy Oscar, listening to the sermons of a local farmer and preacher named Bird Oliver. Stony Point, down in Big Creek, was where on some Sunday in August of 1912, Harriet and Morgan Strickland took their visiting nephew, Tony Howell, to meet the congregation and be welcomed into his aunt and uncle's church. Shiloh Baptist, founded by Reverend Levi Greenlee Sr., lay just outside of town on Kelly Mill Road and was home, to many of Cummings' maids, cooks, servants, and butlers. Faint traces of other black churches are tucked away in handwritten ledgers at the State Archives at Morrow, in the collections at the University of Georgia in Athens, even in the basement of the Forsyth Courthouse, where a cardboard box atop a metal filing cabinet still holds deeds for the land on which black residents once founded Mount Fair, Shakarag, and Stony Point, about which nothing is known but names and approximate locations. And this is why they talk about how so many black individuals have lost so many land, property, assets over hundreds of years at least. I mean, since slavery has ended, so it's about 100 years. But if you think about the black people that weren't enslaved, that had homes prior to, all these are the people that just get washed away in history and is unknown to everyone else. And then you got these new waves of generations, like in 2024, you got people like me buying property in these locations where these people descendants should still be living here, but they're not because they done got, they've been removed. They've been kicked out, chased out. You know what I'm saying? And this is why you have a lot of people that's like, well, how do you provide reparations for people like this? Because historically, black people have just been given the brunt of the stick for, it seemed like forever. Okay. It seems like forever. And I know it's not, but the truth of the matter is that black people have been getting the short end of the stick for a while. And the mentions of reparations just makes people cringe when it comes to black people. And then it's just like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? When it's like, help me, because for generations, I've been stuck in this predicament because if you look back 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, something transpired that has hampered the motherfreaking generations beyond to where they're stuck in the same predicament as they were prior to, if not worse. And a lot of times people are in worse predicaments. Interesting. All that can be said for certain is that again and again, in the fall of 1912, white men sloshed gasoline and kerosene onto the benches and wooden floors of such rooms, then backed out into the dark, tossing lit matches as they went, all over the county, beneath the ground on which black churches stood. The soil is rich with ashes. In their race to outdo one another and to further sensationalize the story, journalists have been reporting Mae Crow's death almost from the moment she was discovered in the woods. Girl murdered by Negro at coming. Mind you, she didn't even die immediately. But they already putting out these articles about some dead girl. Can she die first? It's crazy. Girl murdered by Negro at coming. The front page of Augusta Chronicle had blared on September 9th in an article that informed the readers that Negro's victim died at her home near Cumming tonight. The Macon Telegraph went further, claiming that when Ernest Knox attacked Crow, he beat her into unconsciousness and threw her over a cliff. Once a single false report of Crow's death appeared in print, other editors felt compelled to follow suit. Oh my goodness. Media. You jokers have been motherfreaking. Something has been wrong with y'all since your inception. Oh my goodness. In a typical article in the Constitution closed by informing readers of the sad fact that although every effort was made to save her life, Crow died late Monday afternoon. By the beginning of October, interest in the story had grown so intense that the Georgian upped the ante, writing that Cumming was in an uproar over the death of 2 white women at the hands of Negroes. Mind you, no Negro murdered these white women. They never even had any proof to any of their allegations. Let's continue. Oh, Lord. Meanwhile, Ellen Grice was alive and well out in Big Creek, no doubt busy with the work of running a household in a small farm with her husband, John, and keeping a low profile after all the trouble her allegations had stirred up. Now go back, but this Grice lady accused a black man of being in her bed. It's wild. Wow. I don't know how you wake up to a stranger just chilling in your bed. It's wild. Anyways, Mae Crow lay up in her bed on Oscarville, watched and prayed over by her parents, Bud and AZ, but still very much alive. In the first few days after she was found, Dr. John Hockenhall even told reporters she will likely recover. For many locals, Mae became an object of fascination during her sickness, and at least 2 men were so desperate to get a glimpse of the beautiful, bedridden girl that they made a drunken pilgrimage. According to AZ Crow, when our darling daughter was living here at the point of death, one Sunday, Wheeler Hill and another man came up to our house intoxicated. Hill and his friend, Crow said, wanted to see what the Negroes had done. They hung around a while, and before we knew it, they had gone to the back of the house, then pushed open the door and climbed up and were in the room where our precious daughter lay. But they convinced black people did it. You got some white dudes show up drunk. They don't even give a thing about what you said. They roll up. Oh, you ain't letting us through the front. We going on. Okay, we going to do that. We were coming up in here. It's crazy, but y'all concerned with black people. It's always white people rolling up at people's houses. I mean, look at CPS, the police, the judges, these teachers. It's always white people. I digress. I digress. Oh, Jesus. As much as they were offended by Hill's intrusion, Bud and Azzie made it clear in a letter to the North Georgian that they were not opposed to the raids being waged in their daughter's name and were as anxious as everyone else to be rid of those fiends of hell, Negroes. Heifer, you don't even know who did this. Lord, forgive me. Lady, you don't even know who did this. You or your husband. Oh, my goodness. All right. As September waned, and as the first cold breezes rippled across the Chattahoochee, May grew weaker from her injuries. Despite everything the doctors of the county had tried, and despite her mother's prayers, at some point during the second week of her coma, Dr. George Bryce told Bud and Azzie that her daughter had contracted pneumonia. On September 23rd, 1912, 2 weeks to the day from when she was first found in the woods, May Crow died. Now she did. Not necessarily from the extent of her injuries, but because of this onset of pneumonia. May's funeral was held at Pleasant Grove Church, a short walk from the house where she grew up, and in the center of a whole community of crows. According to her schoolmate Ruth Jordan, the sight of May's coffin being lowered into the ground was almost more than the white people of Oscarville could bear. After she was buried, it seemed like all hell broke loose, Jordan recalled. Soon, the night was filled with gunfire and burning cabins and churches, and the Jordans could hear whites shouting at any black they could find. George Jordan and his wife, Maddie, were poor sharecroppers, like most other whites in Oscarville. Interesting. Black sharecroppers, white sharecroppers. Yet, these white, now not these ones here, but some of these white people be sharecroppers just like these ones. And they be looking at black people as if they beneath them. Baby, we on the same playing field. We in the same boat. It's crazy. Sharecropper oppressing sharecropper is just wild. But we'll continue with the story. Anyways. Like most other whites at Oscarville, but all her life, Ruth had heard the story of how when her mother's mother died at a young age, a black woman that lived nearby became a mother figure to Maddie, teaching her how to cook, keep house, and care for the younger children. And so, as they listened to the crack of gunshots and smelled the smoke of distant fires, George and Maddie Jordan feared for their black neighbors. At one point, Ruth's father went out to check on an African-American couple named Garrett and Josie Cook, who owned 27 acres not far from the land George Jordan was working as a sharecropper. George told his wife that he was going to get news of the goings, but with gangs of night riders on the move, Forsyth had become dangerous even for a 44-year-old white farmer like Jordan, who's a man. As he walked down the road that night, Ruth remembered he was drawn on by a group of armed white men, and it scared him so bad he came home. White man got scared by white men. At first light, George Jordan walked toward Garrett's cook's place. At first light, George Jordan walked towards Garrett's cook's place. Pa went to check on them, Ruth Jordan said, and he found that their house had been shot so full of holes that all the legs on the tables, chairs, and bed had been shot off. When George called out, Garrett and Josie Cook finally emerged, having spent the night hiding in the woods. Jesus. Pa told this man to go back to his farm so the two of them could defend it against anyone that tried to take it from him. The man replied, George, that would just get us both killed. And he left Forsyth County forever. I applaud Jordan and his wife, Maddie, and his family, looking out for their neighbor, you know what I'm saying? And coming up with the idea, but like that man said, y'all just would have died. I mean, baby, them people rolled up on you by yourself. One other person, and it being a black man, I highly doubt it would have made you feel any safer, you know what I'm saying? But I digress. I applaud you, though. I applaud you. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. For days afterwards, The Jordans could hear the sounds of the night riders each evening at dusk, and this went on every night, Ruth Jordan said, until no color was left. Asked whether her father was ever challenged by locals for having tried to help his black neighbors, Jordan answered that to her knowledge, the subject was never brought up by any of the whites involved. Well, of course. Why would they? Isabella Harris, the 8-year-old daughter of coming mayor Charlie Harris, also remembered that September as a terrifying time, particularly once she learned that the night riders were not mountaineers from outside the county, but gangs of ordinary white men, well known to all. Sounds like the police. Harris recalled that one day as she walked home from school and coming, a group of men, part of a mob, passed me in a dirt sidewalk. As they stormed past, Harris said, they looked ahead of them, their eyes angry, their faces impassive with anger and determination. I was so frightened that I climbed to the top of a rail fence and clung there until these men with their horrible faces had gone by. I don't blame you, baby. Such mobs may have been on the other side of Du Bois' color line, but they were far from strangers to the black people they terrorized. In the weeks after May Crow's death, when black residents like Garrett and Josie Cook woke to the sound of a rock smashing through a window or the jangle of bridles outside their door, the order to leave was usually delivered by men whose voices they had heard many times before, employers and landowners, for whom they had plowed and picked cotton. Merchants with whom they had traded and white neighbors they had lived and worked with for years. Now, Jordan and his family are sharecroppers, cotton pickers. And I think it's crazy how, the just cotton picker get attached to white people, black people, and not white people. And obviously, there's white cotton pickers back there. But when you're uneducated, you know what I'm saying? Simple, foolish, and then you mix in pride and arrogant, it's understandable why you don't know something, But let's continue. And whereas in early September, men from the church picnic had been bold enough to try to stand up to the white men pursuing Grant Smith after the lynching and in the wake of May Crow's death, it didn't take much to run off the few black residents still in the county. Joel Witt, a local white man who was 23 in 1912, said that in the beginning, the night riders used gunfire and torches, just as Ruth Jordan remembered. But later, Witt recalled certain men would go to a black person's home with sticks tied up in a little bundle and leave them at the door. By late October, if you made such a thing and placed it outside the cabin of some last proud black farmer, by sunup, he and his whole family would be gone. Jesus. Well, I tell you what, ain't nothing changed. And I just love when people be like, oh, but slavery was so long ago. No one alive today was enslaved. No one alive today deals with the repercussions that are linked to slavery. And then it's just like, well, these people weren't enslaved. Some of these people weren't enslaved, yet they still dealt with it, right? I mean, lynching has existed even today. It's just not rendered in the same magnitude as like how they tried to push the black on Asian, hate crime in early 2020s. It was like 2020, 2021. It's stuff like that. It's just like, wow. You can't use the excuse of that people aren't enslaved anymore. No one alive has been enslaved. No one alive owned a slave. A lot of these people that was out here lynching and wreaking havoc on people didn't own slaves, okay? That's why they were called white trash. They didn't have any money. They weren't affluent, okay? They weren't. They were poor. I mean, if you look into May Crow, her family's history, the land that her and her family lived on originally was purchased by her granddad, a white man, who over time slowly started to lose not only his health and ability to take up, to take care of his land and property, but his land and property was taken over by the government because he was not capable of performing the job that he once did prior to serving in these people's wars. Her great daddy served in these people's war, and every time he came back from war, his body was beat up even more to the point where he was incapable of taking care of his property. So he had to go to the bank and take out this and that to try to maintain his property. And now it's no longer in his control. It's owned by the bank now. And these are poor white people. Her people served in the military. Just like the gentleman and his family who looked after their black neighbors. These people come from very impoverished neighborhoods. I mean, what wealthy person do you know picking cotton, white or black? I don't know any. It's just interesting. So I encourage y'all, if y'all not caught up on chapters 1, 2, and 3, and the 4, you know what I'm saying? Get to that motherfucking description and catch up, okay? Chapter 6, we'll get on it when we get on it, baby, okay? I ain't gonna make no promises because life be lifing. But I love y'all. God bless and peace.